of hard to squeeze in to a short period of time. The long and short of my story, it's funny when you're growing up as a kid and they do like career day and stuff like that in schools, and everybody's talking about, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be a policeman, I want to be a doctor or a lawyer. Nobody grows up and says, I want to be a heroin addict when I grow up. That's not really on the list of given career options. But that ultimately is what I became at the worst points in my life. And there's a lot of people who will make the comment about, addiction is a choice. You chose to pick up, you knew these substances were addictive. But I was born into the disease of addiction. My mother is an addict. She's been an addict my whole life. She has had no period of abstinence or active recovery that I have ever been aware of. She abused prescription narcotics and alcohol when she was pregnant with me, so I was born in opioid withdrawal with fetal alcohol syndrome. And as a result, I had, a lot of health issues. I live with, there's a tumor in my brain that I live with. It's right behind like my left eye. And I live with like an underdeveloped liver, so I have a lot of really strange allergies. And these are not things that I brought upon myself. And I grew up on the flip side of my mom being in active addiction my whole life. My dad is retired law enforcement. So he worked for the PA Counter Drug Task Force for a long time. He did the drug raids and the DARE education programs and things like that. He worked as a corrections officer in the state prison system. So I come from two very opposite extremes. My parents were from two very different sides of the tracks, so to speak. And they split up when I was very young. And as a result of that split, I learned from a really early age this really dysfunctional concept of relationships. I still don't know the whole truth behind their divorce. It's my understanding that it was infidelity on both sides. But as I was growing up, they shared custody. They did like the Wednesday night and every other weekend thing that a lot of parents do. And I remember I was 3 when they separated. And some of my earliest childhood memories are loud arguments, door slamming, courtrooms, custody hearings, and those things are not pretty for a young kid to go through. And for me, now I can look back on that and see that that's reflective of trauma. All of those things were traumatic for me at a very young age. And I know there were points where we lived in just really unfortunate places, neighborhoods that were not very well to do. I remember there was one point where 2 young men broke into our apartment and my dad shot one of them. So my earliest childhood memories are all very traumatic. And as my parents were sharing custody as I was growing up, I remember there would be times when my dad didn't show up or we didn't get to see him. I have 3 younger brothers, but only one was from their marriage. The other 2 are from my dad's second marriage. But I remember my mom, when my dad didn't show up, my mom would say things like, oh, he has a new life. He doesn't have time for you. He doesn't want you. He wants, his new wife, his new sons. She was very manipulative in that way, I have come to learn, because I didn't really have a relationship with my dad after they split up until I was almost in adulthood. Right before I got clean was when I reestablished the relationship with my dad. And I learned that my mom was withholding me from him, and she used me and my brother to manipulate my dad. And she manipulated us too to kind of be polarized against him. And I share that with the purpose of illustrating, I learned dysfunctional relationship patterns. I had trauma, my relationships were all messed up, and I had this very confused sense of self-worth growing up, that I wasn't wanted or I wasn't good enough. And my mom would disappear for days on end and leave us with other family members or family friends who were less than savory. And I learned also this sense of abandonment. I learned that the people who love me will leave me, they will hurt me. And I was left, like, that's one of the biggest emotions that I remember feeling as a kid growing up was like, where are the people who are supposed to love me? Why am I so alone? And that really generalized a lot when I went to school then, because I always felt different from the other kids. And I had this like sense of maturity kind of forced on me, I think. Like I was growing up way quicker than I really needed to, because I was in this situation where I was kind of raising myself, raising my brother, and just the environment of addiction that we were surrounded with at all times. There were always narcotics in the house. My mom was like a doctor shopper, as they say. You know, she bounced around a lot looking for different narcotics, and she got them. And I remember there was a lot of alcohol in the house too. My mom partied a lot, had a lot of friends who partied. They went to like a lot of events that were alcohol related. And I remember I picked up my first drink right around the age of 9. And, I was smoking weed right out of the gate. I remember stealing my mom's narcotics. Like, I had like a wooden nightstand in my bedroom, and I remember like taking her narcotics out of the medicine cabinet across the hallway in the bathroom, sneaking them to my room and crushing them on my nightstand, as just what we would probably consider a little kid. Because I was feeling all of these things, and all I knew was that the chemicals took the feelings away. When I was high or I was drunk, I didn't have to feel separate, different, and alone. I didn't have to feel scared. I didn't have to feel abandoned. I didn't have to feel anything. So for me, drugs became an escape. And I didn't know until I met recovery that I had that like genetic predisposition. I didn't know that I was born in withdrawal until my dad told me years down the road. So I didn't know that I had all of these risk factors in place. I knew what I felt, and I knew that I didn't want to feel it. When I was about 14, I experienced some very violent sexual abuse and trauma at the hands of someone that my mom considered to be a family friend. And she, when that came out, her question, she had several boyfriends over the course of time as well. And something that came out as I was like going through these processes was like this continual message of, what did you do to make him act like that? She asked me this question in various different ways over the course of my growing up, to the point where like I was asking myself, every time that I got abused, I had asked, what did I do to make this happen? I remember one Valentine's Day. There's a lot of holidays that are difficult for me. Like Valentine's Day is one of them. So is Mother's Day, for obvious reasons. But I remember one Valentine's Day, one of her boyfriends, we had argued about something. And he punched me in the side of my head so hard that he tore my earring out, and my ear was bleeding. And I went to my mom and I said, here's what happened. And she said, what did you do to make him that angry? And it was like just repeated trauma, repeated abuse, and the repeated theme of what did you do to deserve this? It was never, let me love you, let me hold you, let me protect you. I never felt that sense of security that I think that ultimately I was looking for. And after I was sexually abused, my mom made that about her. When it finally came out, my abuser made me journal about it. And he would make me read it back to him. And my mom found out because she read the journal. She found it and she read it. And she made it about her. My poor baby girl, and I still didn't feel supported. Fortunately, I have had access to, there's several systems that really helped me in my recovery, to be able to, because it used to be I couldn't speak about that without losing all of my emotional composure. And understandably so, because those kinds of traumatic experiences are heavy. They're very, very difficult to deal with. Thank God for student assistance programs. And, I had a really strong youth group in high school. I was able to maintain some sobriety in high school. I was able to graduate. I had some professors in college and some friends in college who were specifically extremely supportive. And I was able to seek trauma counseling and services to help me deal with those things, and that was very, very helpful. But my addiction worsened. after the abuse. I would say that was probably the turning point for me, because I felt like I had nothing left. And going to school made it worse because I saw like all of the happy kids who came from nice, affluent families, and they had safe homes, and they had, like name brand clothes, and they went shopping, and they had sleepovers, and they did all of that normal stuff that, kids are supposed to do. And I wasn't doing that. I was afraid to have my friends over because I didn't know if my mom was going to be passed out or drunk or who she would have over. So I never had people over, and our house was a disaster. She was a hoarder. I haven't spoken to my mom in a long time, so I still don't really know what her living conditions are like, but they were not good when I was growing up. So I had that sense, again, of being separate, different, and alone. I developed an eating disorder during that time as well because I felt like eating and my body were the only things that I could control. And I had a very sick relationship with my body back then because I felt like it belonged to someone else. I looked in the mirror and I felt dirty and broken, and just very like dissociative almost, like with my body, very dysmorphic. And the first time that I was hospitalized was not actually for my addiction, because by the time I was probably about 16 or 17 was when I was hospitalized for the first time. It was not because I had a full-blown addiction to cocaine and alcohol and opiates and anything else that I could get my hands on. It was because I weighed 88 pounds, and that's not a healthy weight for anybody, no matter how big you are. So, my eating disorder is something that I have also continually worked to keep in check. And as I progressed through high school, I had certain periods of abstinence. I had certain periods where, things were pretty dark. We moved a lot. We relocated a lot. I got in a lot of legal trouble in my teen years because I was angry. I was very angry. Most of the charges that I obtained revolved around assault. I broke a girl's wrist because she looked at me the wrong way at a skating rink one night. I assaulted a cop while I was resisting arrest. And I vandalized anything I could get my hands on because, vandalism was a thing. And I still struggle with that thinking sometimes. I still struggle with that, like, criminal thinking because, I still have the urge sometimes, like, oh, I have nothing to do, like, let's go spray paint something. And that's just not healthy. Ultimately, when I went to college, my drinking got worse. My opioid use got worse. I met heroin when I was in college. I started using by IV when I was in college. And those are like long and complicated stories. But the long and short of that was probably right around November of 2011 was when I started using by IV. I was using heroin by IV. I had been set up on a blind date with a guy who I didn't know at the time was a heroin user. And I had actually had a little bit of recovery at that time, maybe not active recovery, maybe more like abstinence, because I was in school. I was under a student assistance program at the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown. I had professors who were, supportive of me getting my life together because they recognized you're too smart to be doing this. They really believed in me in that way. But I went on this blind date with this guy. We had a couple drinks at a bar. And as soon as we paid the tab, we were, shooting up at his apartment. And the February after that, we were involved in some pretty shady police activity. And I overdosed. And when I overdosed, he left me for dead. This person who, I was dating at the time, who claimed that he had feelings for me and told me that I was beautiful and wonderful, and he was not there. And there is something about, waking up on the floor surrounded by strangers. Thank God the neighbors called the police because we had been arguing. That was a wake-up call for me. Because, I had... In the recovery community, we talk about jails, institutions, and death. I had been through, the institutions and the legal, ramifications of my disease. But I hadn't quite experienced anything that extreme yet. I had fallen out using heroin a couple of times, which is basically when it's not an overdose, but it's heavy usage. but that was really a very frightening wake-up call for me. 4 doses of Narcan later, I haven't used a drug since, and that was February 25th of 2012. So that is my clean date, my recovery date, however we frame that. I've been in recovery since. And as a result, I was able to graduate college. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm back there now studying for my master's in social work. I plan on getting a clinical license. I am the head of Westmoreland's Mobile Drug and Alcohol Crisis Unit. We work with EMS to bridge overdose survivors to treatment. I got married. I bought a house. I have a car that has a muffler on it today, which is a small miracle. No small miracle, maybe. I don't know. And my life is just miles away from where it used to be. And there's a lot more details, in between. There's a lot of nuance in the being an addict. But for me, it's funny because I used to think that the negative ripple of my active addiction would be something that I could never escape. But I've learned since then that the positive ripple of my recovery is much bigger than the negative ripple really ever could be. I guess that's it.